The government's decision to strip away the lifeline of winter fuel payments for millions of pensioners is nothing short of an unforgivable disgrace, a calculated assault on the most vulnerable in society. This is not some abstract policy debate. This is about real lives, real homes, and real suffering. Pensioners, the very backbone of this nation, are now being forced to make an impossible choice: heat their homes or put food on the table. It is a cruel and deliberate decision that prioritizes austerity and corporate greed over basic human dignity. There is no sugarcoating this. It is an act of betrayal, a brutal reminder that the government has abandoned its moral obligations to its citizens. The winter fuel allowance cut, impacting nearly 10 million pensioners, is not a minor adjustment. It is a devastating blow, a sentence to hardship for those who have spent their lives building this country. To claim that this is about fiscal responsibility is an insult to anyone with a shred of intelligence or compassion. We are talking about the elderly, many of whom are already struggling to survive amidst skyrocketing energy bills. This policy is not just a political misstep, it is an outright declaration of contempt for those who cannot fight back. People will die this winter because of this decision, and no amount of spin or empty platitudes from government ministers can erase that fact. The decision to restrict the winter fuel payment to only those on pension credit is not just misguided, it is malicious. This is not a luxury for pensioners. It is the difference between life and death, between warmth and cold, between dignity and despair. To take this away from tens of thousands of people is to condemn them to a winter of suffering. The government knows this. They've seen the figures. They've heard the warnings. And yet they've chosen to turn their backs on those who need help the most. This isn't governance. It's abandonment. Meanwhile, energy companies are raking in record profits, untouched by meaningful taxation or regulation. The government's refusal to impose a windfall tax on these corporations is a glaring indictment of its priorities. They have chosen to shield the wealthy and powerful while pensioners freeze in their homes. The numbers are damning. By the government's own admission, an additional 50,000 pensioners will fall into relative poverty next year because of this policy. By 2026, that number will double to 100,000. These aren't just statistics. They are people, our parents, our grandparents, our neighbors. And they are being sacrificed at the altar of austerity. This is theft, plain and simple. Sharon Graham, General Secretary of Unite, is absolutely right to call it out for what it is. Her words, "Picking the pockets of pensioners is wrong at every level," have resonated across the country. This is not just about money. It's about justice, about fairness, about the kind of society we want to live in. And right now, this government is sending a clear message. If you're vulnerable, if you're struggling, you're on your own. But let's not let the opposition off the hook. Labour, the party that once stood for the working class, has failed miserably to stand up for pensioners. Keir Starmer's Labour has chosen to remain silent, prioritising optics and political calculations over principles. This is not the Labour Party of old, the party of Clement Attlee or Nye Bevan. This is a party that has lost its way, a party that has abandoned the very people it claims to represent. Their refusal to oppose this policy with the full weight of their platform is a betrayal of everything they should stand for. Pensioners deserve better. The country deserves better. The timing of this policy only compounds its cruelty. Winter is here, and energy costs remain punishingly high. Pensioners are already living on the edge, forced to ration heating, skip meals, or huddle under blankets to stave off the cold. These are not isolated stories. They are a growing epidemic of poverty and despair, a damning indictment of a government that has lost its soul. And yet, instead of offering a lifeline, the government has chosen to tighten the noose. The backlash against this policy is growing, and rightly so. Social media is awash with stories of pensioners fighting to be heard, of grassroots campaigns demanding change. The anger is palpable, and the message is clear: this betrayal will not be forgotten. Unite's legal challenge is a critical step, but it cannot end there. This fight must escalate. It must be fought in the courts, in Parliament, and in the streets. The government must be made to understand that this cruelty will not stand. There are alternatives. A windfall tax on energy companies, a wealth tax on the richest in society, these are not radical ideas. They are common sense. They are necessary. Yet the government refuses to consider them, choosing instead to protect the privileged at the expense of the powerless. This is not about fiscal constraints. It is about values. And right now, this government is showing us exactly what it values: profit over people, power over compassion, greed over humanity. For Labour, this is a moment of reckoning. If they do not stand up and fight against this policy, they will lose not just votes but their moral authority. They will find themselves on the wrong side of history, remembered not as a party of justice but as a party that looked the other way. The stakes could not be higher. This is not just about pensioners. It is about who we are as a nation. Will we stand up for the vulnerable, or will we allow them to be sacrificed for political expediency? The answer to that question will define us for generations to come.